Great. So Morgan just talked about the rationale and the reasons why the Urban Tree Canopy tools were developed, and the suite of tools that he focused on were the first two. And I'm going to talk about the second two, and specifically market analyses, which is the third component. Some research, also in Baltimore, looked at the existing tree canopy and market segments. Market segmentation data are frequently used in different types of marketing, particularly around consumer goods. And the way these data are created is they take census data, demographic characteristics, socioeconomics, and they add in other information about magazines, credit card expenditures, the types of cars people buy. All of those types of data are linked through an address. And so there's a lot of attributes about who's living where and what they're buying. And the market segmentation database takes those demographic variables and those consumer expenditures and does a cluster analysis. Now comes these categories. And these categories are really predictive and indicative of the types of things that people buy. And in a rural forestry context, you could think about if somebody owns 150 acres of woodland, do they subscribe to Guns and Ammo because they're interested in hunting? Or do they subscribe to Audubon magazine because they're interested in wildlife conservation and habitat protections? And so these types of data we thought would be helpful for understanding participation in urban forestry. And specifically the idea was that people in different market segments might have different amounts of tree canopy and different amounts of opportunity for tree canopy. And what you see on this slide are the block groups in Baltimore. The colors correspond to different market segments, and the height corresponds to the amount of existing tree canopy. So some research in 2006, 2007 in Baltimore was really exciting in linking the idea of consumer behavior, lifestyles, and as expressed through the geodemographic segmentation and tree canopy. And as we saw before, different people have different prioritizations. Different organizations have different priorities and different goals. And through the voting process that Morgan just described, we have the prioritization map shown on the left. Just as an example, we have the trees planted in the fall of 2013. And when we looked at which organization did planting, and we break it out by priority type on the right, we see that some organizations, like Parks and People, plant on high, medium, medium low, and low priority areas. But Tree Baltimore, for example, only plants on high priority areas. So different organizations work in different areas because they have different programs, and that's okay, and that's great. And the purpose of this slide is to show that different organizations work in different places with respect to the priorities that Morgan explained previously. So what does it have to do with market segments? Here's another example from New York City, where there's a lot of literature that says higher affluence associated with more abundant tree canopy. And while that may be true, what this slide shows on the top are two block groups in New York City with similar median household income. And on the bottom, those two also have similar median household income. But what you see is stark differences from the left and from the right. And so while there may be a general trend in a lot of research showing environmental injustice with respect to tree canopy, what this research suggests is that it's more complex, and that actually the geodemographic data, which capture different types of consumer spending, more than just income, other types of demographic characteristics, like whether or not the household is married, how many people live in that building, age, that there's big differences. So there's differences in the private forest owner, as Morgan described it earlier. The new forest owner is private residential landowner in urban areas. And there's differences among those. And there's also differences among decider groups like Parks Department, Offices of Sustainability, and planning, transportation, and so on. So the market analysis is designed to sort of bridge those two ideas. People have different motivations, capacities, and interests. Also different working on their own residential land or working on public land, such as public rights of way for trees and public parks. So we started to look again at Baltimore, and here's different market segmentation data. And the point I want to make here is there's a spatial distribution as shown on the left, and there's a quantitative distribution as shown on the right. And so there's these different market segments, and previous research has showed there's different amount of tree canopy associated with those different groups, and also different levels of opportunity. In this, what we've done is taken the same market segments as the previous graph, and we have the amount of existing tree canopy possible in areas that are not suitable. Not suitable for the possible tree canopy areas would be non-wood, non-building, non-water, non-existing tree. And so we can subdivide that further, pervious and impervious surfaces. So planting trees where there used to be concrete is more expensive with more benefits, whereas planting trees on grass, shrub, or bare soil areas would be less expensive and also potentially provide fewer benefits. The point here is that the amount of tree canopy varies at different market segments. I'm going to show a few of these graphs, so I'm going to take some time to explain it. On the left, we have what's called odds ratios. And the important thing here is the 1. An odds ratio of 1 means that participation in these different planting programs is perfectly equitably distributed with respect to the number of households in those market segments. So if 10% of the population was classified as soloacs and they received 10% of the trees, then they would have an odds ratio of 1. If your population in that city, if for example, in Metropolis, 50% of the city population is Metropolis, and they got 10% of the stuff, the free trees, the odds ratio would be at 0.5. If you have 20% of the population getting 40% of the stuff, that would correspond to this 2 over here. So these dots correspond to different tree planting programs and also rain barrels in Baltimore across these different market segments. And on the right axis, we have the amount of existing and possible tree canopy, which is the same as the previous graph, but it's shown here on the right axis. So you see these market segments are stratified, are arrayed from low income on the left to high income on the right. And what we see is that the highest income areas have the most tree canopy, shown here with the green horizontal line, and the least opportunities for additional tree canopy, shown in the black dotted lines. However, their participation was really high, 500%, what we would have expected under a completely equitably distributed scenario, odds ratio of greater than 5. So what we found is that participation in the tree planting programs, which is different from the amount of existing or possible tree canopy, varies differently than perhaps was intended. So that was an example for Baltimore. We've done peer review research in Washington, D.C. and in Baltimore on tree giveaway programs. Now reports from the city, for example, project was interested in understanding who's participating in their tree planting programs, where are those free trees going, and which types of market segments are their current outreach strategies really resonating with, and where are they not resonating so well. So the graph. The point here is that we can parse by time. So we have tree giveaways 2008 through 2013, grouped here by year. And what you see is that participation is more equitably distributed than in the case of Baltimore. But that participation grows over time. So for example, in global roots, what we see is under participation in the early years and participation on par with what we would anticipate under completely equitably distributed. Another point I want to make here is that we can go back and say, okay, well, what happened? We had high participation for upscale avenues in 2009. what happened, and to understand from the urban foresters who worked there, the people who administered those programs, why were they successful when they were, and then why are they maybe less successful when they were less successful. And again, this is just to show that it varies with existing or possible tree canopy. We've also done the same research in Philadelphia, and again, you can see participation changes over time and by location. That's the graph on the right. And just to quickly show, the odds ratios are all very, very close to 1. Senior Styles is slightly underperforming, as is Sloax, whereas Metropolis and Family Portrait are sort of overperforming for Tree Philly's tree giveaway program. So we're doing this research now in DC, Baltimore, New York, Philadelphia. And what we started to realize is a lot of what's going on can be so tough. And we think there's really 3 groups of variables that are occurring. So we have the message, so what is being communicated about the benefits of trees, the messenger, or how is it being communicated? This could be print media, urban foresters, word of mouth, neighbors, social media. And then these are the market segments that I've just been talking about. So, and I think the programs that we've analyzed so far tend to fit into the top. There's sort of an interaction between what and how, and it's being distributed to everybody. And what we propose is exemplified on the bottom, where there might be different messages that are more effective in market segments. And similarly, there might be different messengers that are better able to communicate or to convince the different populations the values of urban trees. So what we are trying to propose with another phase of research is that we need to understand the right mix of market, message, and messenger that are most effective. So how can we pre-identify types of things that are most effective? So, for example, telling renters trees increase property values. That's a combination of the renter is the who, or the market. The message would be increasing property values. And the messenger could be an urban forestry organization website. Might not be effective with renters, but that might be really effective with renters. So we're trying to tease apart and pre-identify the mix will be most effective. So this is a graphic from our report in Baltimore looking at market analyses, and there's 3 things going on here. We have the priorities along the bottom, high, medium, low, that correspond to the maps that Morgan showed where the organizations were able to cast their votes. Vertically, we have the different market segments that I've been talking about. And then the colors correspond to the amount of possible planting area. The area that's outlined in that red dotted line presents a mix of areas where existing programs are working, where there's lots of available space. So, for example, it might not make sense to work in a low priority area just because there's a lot of space. For example, like Metropolis, they're low priority, lots of possible area. And that would be this column all the way on the right, this cell. Whereas areas inside the red dotted line box present a mix of where current outreach is working, and you have lots of opportunities, and they're high priority. So the priority would communicate with sort of the decision-making stakeholders, and the geodemographic segment would reflect who the possible planting areas are, and then the amount of space you have. So this is showing 3 UTC tools that we've developed in one graphic. And then the 4th tool, just briefly, we're starting to look at change analysis. This is from DC. And the important thing here is we can look at the amount of change, whether the change occurred in lots of small patches, or in this case, a large patch, who the owner of those changing landscapes are, and how those are related to different social, economic, and environmental factors. This is some summary from data from DC where we found that the lowest income areas had the least amount of tree canopy, but also lost the most in both area and as percent of area. So just to summarize, we've developed these tools to assess how much tree canopy you have, how much you could have. That's often influence goals. We've developed the prioritization tools as a way to implement and to prioritize goal setting and to make to increase engagement across stakeholders. And then we realized just because it's a high priority area, people aren't necessarily working there. We need to understand the motivations, capacity, and interests of private residential landowners. So we've developed the market analysis tools to understand where current programs are working and where they're not working. And then finally, we're looking at how the urban forest is changing over time. Please feel free to contact me with any further questions. I think that's all the time I have for now. Thanks for listening.